What if, long ago, before names and stories, before even the comfort of memory, the earth stirred not with noise, but with a kind of breathless recognition? What if something deep beneath stone and salt, something old and dreaming, finally opened its eyes? Not all awakenings are loud. Some are quiet. Some arrive like the lifting of fog, or the first ripple on still water after centuries of stillness. We call it the Cambrian Explosion. But explosions are loud, violent things. This was something different. A bloom, perhaps. A remembering. For nearly 4 billion years, Earth had lived in silence, teeming only with the most basic of life. Tiny cells, threads of slime, microbial kingdoms hidden beneath waves and rock and time. Then, suddenly, impossibly, life became visible, complex, curious. Eyes opened in the deep. Bodies bent and twisted and armored themselves. And in the oceans, forms we barely understand began to drift and crawl and hunt. It happened so quickly, geologically speaking, that even now we struggle to explain it. From a world of simple things came creatures with limbs, shells, claws, vision. Trilobites rolled like armored secrets across the seafloor. Anomalocaris darted like alien shadows. Worms that wore spines like whispers of warning. It was as if Earth had not created them, but remembered them. As if the planet was recalling something it had once forgotten, or had longed for all along. Was it chemistry? A shift in oxygen levels, perhaps, slowly feeding the possibility of complexity? Or was it time? Just enough time for potential to coil and spring? Maybe the tectonic plates, grinding softly over eons, had shifted just enough to stir new minerals into the ocean's bloodstream. Maybe it was entropy, patiently unraveling the old so the new could begin. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. There is no single answer. The fossil record tells only what it can. Bits of bone, imprints in stone, silent echoes of what once moved. But the suddenness of the Cambrian still puzzles. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like an unveiling. A moment when the curtain of simplicity lifted and something intricate stood behind it. Waiting, watching, and yet, even in all its vividness, much of that world is gone now. Erased by time, subducted into the mantle or weathered into dust. The ocean floors on which these beings lived have been pulled under continents, melted into fire, reshaped as mountains. The air they breathed has long since blown away. What remains are traces. Fossils, microscopic crystals, isotope ratios locked in ancient zircons, ghosts in the geology. It makes you wonder, how much can be lost before we forget something ever existed? How many worlds has Earth worn before this one? Could there have been other awakenings, deeper still, buried beneath the reach of science or dream? Entire epochs of life, stories of adaptation and collapse, all swallowed by the slow hunger of deep time, not erased maliciously, but worn away gently, like a tide smoothing the edges of a memory. And yet, the Cambrian persists, not just in stone but in us. The lineage of vision, the logic of limbs, the ancient fear of teeth in the dark. They echo in our nervous systems, our reflexes, our DNA. What rose in the Cambrian never truly died. It simply evolved, shifted, forgot parts of itself while carrying others forward. Could it be that the Earth dreams through us now? That we, with all our wonder and science and searching, are how the planet remembers what it once began? We trace the bones. We reconstruct the forms. We try to understand why complexity blooms at all, when simplicity is so much easier. We marvel at how life resists stillness, how it insists on becoming more. Perhaps that is what awakening is. Not a single moment, but a pattern, a loop. Life stirs, becomes strange, grows vivid, and then vanishes only to return again in a different shape. Perhaps we are always on the edge of such awakenings, even now. Small pulses in deep oceans, mutations waiting in quiet cells, patterns slowly aligning across eons. The Cambrian was not an explosion. It was a breath, a widening, a shimmer across the fabric of life's story. And when we look back at that shimmer, we do not just see crustaceans and sea worms. We see the first threads of a tapestry we're still weaving. And yet, If this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? Long before the sudden flourish of strange life in the Cambrian seas, the earth itself lay wrapped in a kind of patient stillness. Not dead, not dormant, but drifting somewhere between fire and frost, a slumbering sphere beneath a pale sun. The oceans were there, yes, but quiet, wide, dark, heavy with ancient chemistry. No coral, no fish, no voices in the deep. Just cold water flowing slowly over volcanic ridges and sinking into the quiet seams between continents. Planet not empty, but waiting. In that silence, tectonic plates moved like thought, slow, deliberate, unfinished. Beneath them, the mantle churned in its timeless sleep, folding and stretching the crust above like an ancient dream remaking itself. Magma pulsed without witness. Gases seeped upward from volcanic vents, rich with minerals, whispering to the sea in plumes of heat. The atmosphere above, thin, shifting, was not yet the air we know. Methane, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. A mix more alien than familiar. A breathless sky hung with haze and light the color of metal. This was not yet a world of eyes and skin and speech. It was a world of forming. But beneath that apparent quiet, energy moved. Entropy did not rest. Deep within the mantle, radioactive isotopes decayed with steady rhythm, heating the planet's core like a beating heart buried in molten stone. Every half-life a step, every tick of atomic unraveling another inch toward change. The crust cooled, cracked, reset. Oceans formed from vapor and clung to the surface like memory condensed into water. Erosion began its quiet work, grinding, softening, preparing. Mountains that no longer exist rose and fell in the span of forgotten epochs. Their peaks long since weathered into grains of sand now buried beneath other forgotten things. And still Earth turned. Slowly, silently, its axis tilted just enough to change the seasons, to stir wind, to fracture the ice that stretched across ancient poles. Glaciers waxed and waned in cycles were only just beginning to trace through isotopes locked in rocks older than language. These isotopes, oxygen, carbon, sulfur, carry records of temperature and chemistry, silent data etched in atomic weight. We read them now like letters from the deep past, a language the earth speaks without words. The strange, isn't it, to think of a world alive before life as we know it had bloomed? To imagine a place full of motion, full of change, full of potential. Yet without eyes to see it, without nerves to feel it. And still, the planet moved forward. Not because it had to, but because it could. Because physical laws do not rest, even when time seems still. Because decay, that most patient of forces, never stops its slow work. And in that work, possibility stirs. Maybe it's the silence that makes it seem so distant. A world of fire beneath and ice above, shaped by tides that had no witness, and winds that carved rock without memory. No stories, no voices, no one to mark the hours. Just gravity, heat, pressure, and the long waiting of carbon atoms bonding with oxygen, breaking apart, drifting. It was not a dead world, but a world rehearsing. And in the folds of that rehearsal, something began. Microscopic, invisible, fragile. Life didn't burst forth, not yet. Crept, clustered. It formed films on wet rock and colonies in shallow pools. Cyanobacteria began to breathe, to exhale oxygen into a sky that had never known it. And though they left few fossils, their work changed everything. Slowly, irreversibly, they painted the world in a gas that would one day feed fire, fuel thought, shape ecosystems. And as that oxygen accumulated, the air began to clear. The haze faded. Sunlight found the ocean floor. Still, the earth slumbered, not unaware, but unhurried. Not alone, but unshaped. It took nearly 1 billion more years for that oxygen to reach tipping point, for the balance between input and decay to tilt toward what we now call habitability. In that time, continents shifted again. Oceans grew deeper. Volcanoes darkened the sky and vanished beneath the waves. Glacial periods came and went, locking water in ice and releasing it again like breath. The planet of slumber was also a planet of fire. Not in contradiction, but in rhythm. Not opposites, but partners. Fire forged the crust, gave it heat, pushed minerals from the deep. And sleep gave Earth patience. Time to build, to erode, to forget and begin again. And it makes you wonder, if this is what the Earth was while asleep, what might it become when fully awake? What signals the turning point from geologic dream to biological memory? Could it be light? Could it be time? Could it be something deeper, older, etched into the rock itself, waiting to be read? And if this quiet, molten planet could change so completely, what else might rise from silence next? Could it be something deeper, older, etched into the rock itself, waiting to be read? Beneath our feet, beneath the stones and the silt and the stories we build, something breathes. Not as we do, not in and out, but with heat, with pressure, with cycles so vast and slow that to us, they appear still. And yet the Earth moves. Inside it stirs. The core spins, the mantle churns, and the crust shifts in quiet fits, like the rising and falling of lungs beneath ancient skin. We often think of the ground as solid, as unmoving, but that stillness is an illusion born of our speed. Geology moves like sleep, restless, rhythmic, always becoming. Under the surface, heat seeps upward in silent exhalations, drawn from radioactive decay and primordial fire. This heat doesn't roar. It whispers. Through fractures and faults, it rises, warming the rocks, warming the water, warming the silence. It is the Earth's breath, a geothermal sigh that never truly stops. We can feel it in the volcanic islands scattered across the oceans, in the hot springs that bubble in alpine valleys, in the fumaroles that ghost their vapors into thin, lonely air. We can trace it in the mid-ocean ridges, those submerged seams where new crust is born from fire and fed into the sea. These are not accidents. They are part of Earth's slow respiration, a system of exchange, a planet inhaling from the deep and exhaling into the surface world, again and again and again. And this breathing shapes everything. When molten rock rises from below, it doesn't just cool into stone. It carries minerals, nutrients, elements, ingredients for oceans, for atmospheres, for life. It shifts the seafloor, builds mountains, splits continents. It opens space where none was before, and closes space where time has passed. Subduction zones pull ancient crust downward, back into the mantle, recycling the old into something new. The seafloor, in its quiet march, becomes both memory and womb. Maybe that's why so much of Earth's history is missing. Maybe we lose it not to violence, but to respiration. Whole chapters of geologic time folded back into the deep, melted, stirred, forgotten. Not because the Earth is cruel, but because it is alive. And life forgets sometimes so it can begin again. The ocean crust is young, always young, because the Earth is always making more. The oldest stones are on the continents, the shields, the cratons, but even these bear the marks of slow reworking, of folding and faulting and fracture. No surface remains untouched. Everything bends. Still, in that bending we find stories. We read the heat flow. We measure the helium isotopes that drift up from the mantle like ancient messages. We listen to the seismic waves that ripple from deep beneath our feet, moving faster through some rocks than others, telling us secrets in their velocity. We follow the gradient of warmth down boreholes, watching how the temperature climbs, even when the air above is frozen. Always there is warmth beneath. Always the breath continues. What powered the Cambrian's bloom? Maybe it was not only the oxygen in the oceans or the erosion of ancient mountains. Maybe it was this deep breath, too. A warming from below. A release of metals and minerals into the sea, carried by hydrothermal vents at the spreading centers of the Earth. Iron, sulfur, phosphorus, silent passengers in the planet's exhale, feeding microbial life, feeding possibilities. Could it be that life's great unveiling began not in light, but in heat? Not in the sky, but in the quiet spaces where magma touches water and changes everything? Even now, those vents remain. Black smokers, white chimneys, strange towers that belch heat into the abyss. Around them, ecosystems flourish without sunlight, without photosynthesis. Worms with no mouths, clams with no stomachs, bacteria that feed on minerals, not light. Life, forming from breath and stone. as if the earth is still remembering how it all began, as if the deep breath never ended, only changed direction. And it makes you wonder how much of what we call life is shaped by what lies below, by things we cannot see, cannot touch, cannot hear, but which press upward all the same. Could we exist without this warmth? Could anything? Or are we, in some strange way, only here because the planet keeps breathing? Perhaps life is not separate from stone, not born above it or beyond it, but through it, because of it, because deep heat stirs, and minerals rise, and entropy moves in slow circles beneath the crust, because time, even when buried, does not sleep. And if the earth breathes, what else might it be feeling? Before the first bone curved beneath flesh, before the first eye gathered light, there was only water. Not just liquid, but something older, deeper, a vast and patient reservoir of memory. The ocean, salty with ancient dissolution, silent with possibility, moving in rhythms too wide for the human clock, it cradled the ingredients of everything to come. Hydrogen and oxygen, once forged in the collapse of dying stars, now bound together in waves that never forgot. This water, this soft mirror that wrapped the world, was the first great keeper of time. It did not mark days or measure years. Instead, it stored chemistry. It remembered through dissolution, salts from stone, iron from vents, carbon from breathless skies. Each molecule added to its memory, each current folding layers of history across itself. Not a diary, but a deep hum. Not a record, but a living archive. In the beginning, the ocean was still and dark and full of questions. There were no fish, no reefs, no coral, just particles drifting. Light, if it reached the surface at all, scattered quickly into shadow. And yet, here in this depth, life began. Not in bursts, but in slow arrangements. Molecules bumping in silence. Chains forming, breaking, reforming. Lipids wrapping around themselves. RNA copying, folding, forgetting. 1,000 microscopic rehearsals before the first line was ever spoken. And always water listened. Maybe that's why the ocean is still so full of echoes. Every tide is a repetition. Every wave a memory of the ones before. Life remembers itself in the way seafoam gathers at the shore, and in the way currents slide across the seafloor like fingers over forgotten letters. Deep time doesn't speak loudly, it drips, pools, evaporates, returns. The ocean has no bones to break, but it holds the minerals that build them. No eyes to see, but it carries light deeper than expected. Before we were creatures, we were chemistry. Before there was structure, there was solution. We emerged from water not as visitors, but as something it had always intended to unfold. Not because we were destined, but because possibility lingers wherever there is motion and heat and time. Could it be that water itself remembers how to build life? That within every drop is the residue of decisions made billions of years ago? When we analyze seawater today, we find not just salt, but stories. Isotopes that trace the breath of volcanoes. Ratios of oxygen that whisper glacial songs. Particles drifting from the atmosphere above and the mantle below. A meeting place for all Earth's moods. The ocean forgets nothing. Even when it erases, it remembers. When erosion wears mountains into sediment, the ocean gathers it. When rivers carry nutrients from land to sea, the ocean holds them. When extinction sweeps away whole branches of the tree of life, the ocean buries the remains in layers of quiet mud. There, far below the light, shells turn to limestone, bones to fossil, soft tissue to trace carbon. Entire worlds compressed into silence. Compressed, but not lost. Some of that memory rises again, uplifted by shifting plates, by time's slow tectonic shrug. Once seafloor becomes mountain, oceanic stories, written in carbonate and chert, now sit at the roof of the world. Himalayan peaks still carry marine fossils, proof that once, even the sky rested beneath the waves. What other memories lie misplaced? What oceans have been forgotten completely, erased by subduction, by fire, by the turning of supercontinents? Maybe we will never know, or maybe the ocean still knows for us. Even now, as we drift towards sleep, The deep sea flows unseen. Down there, the oldest water moves slowly, carrying cold and secrets from the polar abyss toward the equator. Thermohaline currents that take 1,000 years to complete a circuit. Ancient water, untouched by sunlight for centuries, traveling through the bones of the planet. Breathing, remembering, and floating within it, life persists. Plankton drifting like stardust. Bacteria feeding on nothing but iron. Jellies pulsing in their own translucent time. These are not new lives. They are echoes, descendants, fragile continuations of a story that began when the world was still too young to have language. When everything was water. When memory wore no name. We like to think of ourselves as separate from this, as something that emerged. But in truth, we are still mostly water. Still mostly salt. Still mostly silence. Our blood reflects the sea's chemistry. Our tears taste like the early earth. Our cells still swim. And maybe that's why we feel calm near the ocean. Not because it's beautiful, but because it remembers us. Because something in its breath reminds us of where we began. Because in its depth, there is something older than thought, something that never needed words. And if water remembers so much, what else might it be holding? Time too is held, but not always as we imagine it. We measure it in seconds, hours, years. We draw lines on calendars and tick clocks with numbers that march forward. But the Earth keeps time differently. In layers, in pulses, in heat and erosion and silence. Deep time doesn't move like a straight road. It drifts, it folds. It lingers in stillness and then leaps forward, uninvited. There are moments in the fossil record when time appears to breathe. Long periods stretch where little seems to change. Species come, species go, but the pattern holds steady, like a long, quiet inhale. And then suddenly, everything shifts. Complexity rises. Forms multiply. Bones harden. Shells bloom. Eyes appear. A quickening. A burst. An exhale of invention. The Cambrian was one of those moments. But it wasn't just a beginning. It was a fracture. A crack in the usual rhythm. A place where the arrow of time didn't just move forward. It jumped. In rock, we can trace it. Layers packed tight with new forms. Patterns we've never seen before and never truly again. Trilobites in astonishing variety. Worms with teeth. Creatures with bodies we still struggle to classify. It's not just the presence of life, but the pace of it that confounds us. As if the planet hit fast forward, just for a moment, and then slowly resumed its breath. Why then? Why that exact window of time 500 million years ago? Was it oxygen rising in the oceans, finally tipping into abundance? Was it new minerals entering circulation from a reshaped seafloor, stirring metabolism into overdrive? Or was it something stranger, something beyond chemistry? Could life itself, hidden in the quiet for so long, have reached a tipping point? Not of opportunity, but of memory? Perhaps evolution doesn't unfold evenly. Perhaps it waits, stores energy, observes its surroundings, and then, when conditions align, it surges. Not because it's meant to, but because it can. Because entropy sometimes allows for local exceptions. For strange little rebellions against the drift toward disorder. Life, in that sense, may be a soft defiance. A pause in the unraveling. A momentary spiral within the flow of time's great river. But even spirals dissolve. Even bursts fade. The Cambrian surge was not forever. Many of its creatures vanished, leaving only fossilized outlines or nothing at all. Extinction swept through like a tide. Not one wave, but many. Whole lineages erased before they fully began. The record is spotted with gaps, strata that should contain clues, but don't. Time again slipping sideways. What isn't preserved often feels louder than what is. Maybe that's the lesson of deep time. It is not linear, not smooth. It moves in breath and stutter, in layering and fracture. Some moments are long and uneventful. Others, brilliant, terrifying, are too brief to hold. And what we see in the rocks, in the isotopes, in the sediment left behind, is not a clean story, but a broken one. A book half burned and rewritten in ash and pressure. Even the boundaries between ages are not clear. The earth does not place bookmarks. It folds one chapter into the next, blurring endings with beginnings. Volcanic ash becomes the roof of a buried forest. A comet strike becomes a layer of clay. The rearrangement of continents becomes the rising of mountains, and then long after their decay. And so we look back not along a single path, but across a cracked mosaic, a shifting gallery of preserved impressions. And every so often, in these fragments, we sense something strange, a rhythm that doesn't match our clocks, a life that bloomed too quickly, a silence that lasted too long. Could time itself behave differently under different pressures? Could it, like heat or light, warp and refract across geologic scales? Could memory stretch in rock the way it does in dreams? Not because the planet intends it, but because the rules that govern stones and stars are not bound by our language. Because entropy, though inevitable, makes space for pattern before it wins. Because time, especially here, does not always unfold in order. It breathes, it breaks, it begins again. And if time can fracture, what else might it let slip through? There was a moment, somewhere in the dark expanse of early oceans, when something shifted, not in stone, not in heat or pressure, but in perception. A moment when a creature, small and soft and ancient, did something no one had done before. It noticed the light. Not just warmth or brightness, not just shadow and glow, but difference. A flicker, a direction, a movement above. And in that moment, the world changed. What made creatures see? Not just respond to light, but truly sense it. To shape their being around it. To let it carve meaning into their nerves. For billions of years, life had been blind. Blind not because it was lesser, but because it didn't yet need to see. Chemical gradients, currents, touch, these were enough. But slowly, subtly, light began to matter more. Maybe the oceans were clearing, just enough for sunlight to pierce deeper. Maybe prey became faster. Maybe the shadows began to lie. And so, slowly, pigment gathered in clusters. Cells that once merely darkened in response to light became domes, pits, cups. Light-sensitive tissues curled, folded, deepened. Some focused, some reflected. Tiny lenses formed like accidents of purpose. Sight wasn't invented, it emerged, piece by piece. Not in a single leap, but in a slow unfolding. Not because life had a plan, but because perception offered an advantage too profound to ignore. To see is to know before the touch, before the danger, before the loss. Trilobites were among the first to look back. Their eyes, compound and crystalline, glinted beneath ancient waves. Made not of flesh but of calcite, the same mineral as limestone, as shells, as mountain marrow. They didn't just absorb light, they sculpted it. Thousands of tiny lenses tiled across their curved heads, catching refractions, catching time. They may not have known what they saw, but they saw. They looked toward the sun, through water, through shifting particles. They looked at each other. They looked at us in a way. To see is not merely to witness. It is to separate the world from the self. With sight, a creature understands that it is here, and that something else is there. It introduces distance, identity, the possibility of motion, of decision, of strategy. With sight, death becomes visible. So does choice. So does beauty. The emergence of vision wasn't just a sensory step. It was an existential one. It rewired everything. Predator and prey began to play a game of illusions, of mimicry, of color and contrast and camouflage. Light became a language, and the language grew. Eyes adapted in dozens of ways. Some detected motion, others gauged shape or brightness or color. Some bent light with oil, others filtered it through pigments. Even now, in the modern sea, the mantis shrimp carries perhaps the most complex visual system known. 12 color channels, polarized light, multiple depths of focus. But the root of it all began in the Cambrian dark, when light became a question, and eyes became the answer. What changed when the deep became visible? Did the creatures feel wonder, or only fear? Was there a moment when one life form looked upon another not just as food or threat, but as something curious? Something strange? Could it be that the first eyes marked not just a new survival strategy, but a shift in the very pace of evolution? Seeing meant reacting faster. Reacting faster meant dying slower. And dying slower meant more chances to change. In the fossil record, sight leaves no direct trace. Only the eyes themselves fossilize if we're lucky, but their effects ripple outward. The Cambrian seas suddenly fill with complex behaviors. Burrows deepen, armor thickens, spines multiply, as if being seen demanded response, as if exposure was a new kind of vulnerability. And so the arms race began, not in weapons but in awareness. And maybe this was the moment time itself changed again. When light became not just energy, but history. When direction became story. Because once creatures could see, they could follow, pursue, flee, track, hesitate. Eyes created memory. And memory, even in its most primitive form, is what ties moments together. We still carry this legacy. In every eye that closes before sleep, in every glance cast upward at stars. The shapes of our vision, the depths of our perception, are built upon those first ancient gazes beneath the sea. Our retinas respond to the same light that filtered through Cambrian tides. Our brains interpret shadows the way theirs once did. The eye is not an invention of humans. It is a gift passed down through hundreds of millions of years. A slow evolution of attention. And it makes you wonder what other senses once rose and fell, long before we knew how to name them. What ancient perceptions shimmered in creatures now lost, whose ways of seeing may never fossilize at all. Is it possible that sight was only the beginning, that other ways of knowing, stranger and subtler, once flickered in the dark? And if eyes could emerge from nothing, what else might rise next? First, life was soft, vulnerable, unarmored. It moved through the ocean like breath, pliable, open, unshielded. But slowly, something changed. Not in violence, not in sudden war, but in pressure, in presence, in awareness, in the simple fact that once eyes existed, so did the gaze. And to be seen is to be known. And to be known is to be hunted. And so, the bodies that had once flowed like ribbon and mist began to harden. Shells curled over backs. Plates locked into place, spines rose from skin, and the earth, once a quiet ocean of fragile forms, began to fill with the crunch of mineral and bone. Not because the planet became cruel, but because the rules had changed. Light had entered the water, sight had spread, and life responded not with panic, but with invention. What makes a body decide to grow armor? Is it fear? A reaction to danger, to death, to teeth in the dark? Or is it something more curious, more deliberate, a kind of slow creativity? Evolution does not plan, but it experiments, tests, forgets, and sometimes it remembers, and in the Cambrian it remembered stone. Shells did not form all at once. First, thin layers of calcium carbonate, then more, then thicker, stronger, layered in spirals, in domes, in curious symmetry. Some lined their insides with mother of pearl, iridescent and silent. Others sculpted spikes like frozen lightning. In fossil beds, we now find them clustered together, creatures encased in homes they built from the sea itself. Skeletons, not hidden inside, but worn proudly outside, as if Earth had whispered, "Protect yourself," and life had listened. But perhaps it wasn't only protection. Perhaps it was expression. A message written in mineral, a choice shaped by environment and time. The same ocean that softened and cradled also contained the ingredients to harden. Calcium, silica, iron, dissolved and drifting, waiting to be claimed. The water gave both the threat and the tool, and life, ever resourceful, took both. Could it be that the first shells were more than shields? Could they have felt like safety, but also like transformation? The transition from soft to hard is not just physical, it is a statement, a boundary, a declaration that says, "I am here, and I wish to remain." In this way, skeletons are not only defenses, they are promises. Bones are memories that resist forgetting, and in resisting, they leave behind clues. Fossils, casts, fragments of once-living fortresses. We find them now in shale and limestone, pressed into layers like pages of a book too heavy to lift. Sometimes a full outline, perfect and still. Sometimes only a curve, a ripple, a dent. The trade-off of protection is less freedom. The price of safety is slowness. And so, not all creatures chose this path. Some remained soft, invisible, ephemeral. Some hid in mud, in currents, in quiet. Some vanished without a trace. And we will never know their names. Maybe that's the true mystery. Not why some forms hardened, but why others didn't. What is it that pushes life toward preservation instead of fluidity? What makes memory solidify in stone rather than dissolve into silence? And is one better than the other, or are they both necessary? Perhaps entropy makes room for both forgetting and fossilization. Perhaps both are forms of survival. And as we walk the earth now, among mountains made from ancient reefs, along coastlines once buried in trilobite shells, we are surrounded by skeletons. In rock, in sand, in ourselves. Our own bodies are frameworks of calcium, silent echoes of oceans past. The mineral in our bones was once dissolved in Cambrian seas. We are not separate from the story. We carry it quietly with every step. And it makes you wonder, if armor began as a whisper from the world, what else might the earth be quietly suggesting? Beneath the soil, beneath the layers of pressure and stillness, a language sleeps. It does not use sound. It does not speak in voice or breath. And yet, it tells stories, patiently, precisely, etched in stone, curled in calcium, pressed into the quiet. Fossils are time's handwriting, the earth's own memory carved in mineral. Not loud, not boastful, but steady. Each one a sentence, each one a breath held too long, each one a fragment of a world that once was, and still echoes. We find them in the most unlikely places, in mountains made from ancient seabeds, in deserts where coral once bloomed, in cliffs and quarries and riverbanks, where deep time has been pulled forward into light. Some are clear, perfect shells, coiled tight like musical notes. Others are partial, teeth without jaws, spines without bodies, outlines without names. And some are mere impressions, a ripple, a shadow, a trace, a suggestion that something passed through this world once and left a mark. To read a fossil is to read an emotion the earth has not forgotten. It is to translate pressure and chemistry into presence. The minerals are not the creature, but they remember the shape, the curve of a fin, the delicate hinge of a trilobite's eye, the feathered ghost of a sleeping bird. And even when the body is gone, the form lingers. Fossilization does not preserve life, preserves memory. And memory, when buried deep enough, can last longer than mountains. But not all memories are kept equally. Fossils are biased, selective. The record is incomplete, not because of intention, but because of conditions. Soft bodies vanish. Fragile forms dissolve. Only under the perfect weight, with the right minerals in the right timing of decay, does a fossil form. A rare alchemy, a moment when loss pauses just long enough to leave behind a sketch. Most lives are not recorded. Most stories are erased. Entire epics lived and vanished without leaving a single trace we can find. And yet, what remains speaks volumes. We learn not just what lived, but how it lived, what it ate, where it moved, how it died. We find teeth worn in patterns that suggest chewing, not tearing. Limbs that hint at burrowing. Joints that once swam, now locked in stone. We follow burrow marks across sediment, tracing paths like thoughts. And footprints, frozen mid-step, tell of motion, of hesitation, of moments never meant to be witnessed. Could it be that the earth, without knowing, is always writing? That sediment is a kind of memory foam? That time leaves fingerprints not because it chooses to, but because it cannot help it? Every layer of shale, every band of limestone, every fossilized ripple in ancient sand is a syllable. And we are the ones learning to read. We use tools now, carbon dating, isotope trails, elemental scans. We analyze trace metals, the orientation of crystals, the oxidation states of buried shells. We listen to silence through microscopes. But even with all this, much is still missing. Fossils give us facts, but not feelings. They show the outline, but not the dream. What did these creatures know? What did they fear? Did they sense the changing tides, the shifts in current, the slow drift of oxygen through the sea? Could they feel extinction drawing near, like a cold shadow from the future? Or did they simply live unknowing, as we often do, wrapped in the now, unaware of the layers forming beneath our feet? Maybe that's why fossils feel sacred. Not because they are perfect, but because they are rare, because they are accidents of remembrance in a universe of forgetting. We hold them gently, brush them clean, place them in glass, not as trophies but as whispers, as if, by studying them closely enough, we might hear the voice of the planet itself. There are fossils that changed everything. The Burgess Shale, the Chungjiang beds, sites where the Cambrian speaks in full sentences. Here we find creatures so strange, so elaborate, so unlike anything we know, that they feel more like dreams than ancestors. Anomalocaris opabinia hallucigenia, forms that defy logic, that challenge the idea of what a body can be. And yet, they were real. They lived. They left behind shapes we can trace. Bones of imagination. And still, the Earth writes, fossils are being formed right now somewhere. A fish sinking into an oxygen-depleted lakebed. A leaf pressed into volcanic ash. A mollusk buried in estuarine silt. Most will fade, but a few may hold on, may last, may someday be found. And someone someday may wonder who we were, may brush dust from the trace of a hand, or a tooth, or a plastic shell, and ask, what was this? And if fossils are how the Earth remembers, what happens to the things it forgets? Between the layers, between the fossils and the stone, there is a hush, a stillness not caused by calm, but by absence. In some places, rock after rock bears life, shells, bones, teeth, traces, a chorus of preservation. But then a gap, a blank, a seam in the strata where the page turns and nothing is written. And we are left to wonder, did life pause? Or did memory fail? These are the silences between strata, geological voids where time passed, but the world left no message. Sediments were laid down, hardened, tilted by tectonic forces, uplifted, exposed, and still no sign of the creatures who must have lived then. No footprints, no impressions, no fossils at all. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing was kept. And in those absences, the echoes grow louder. We call them unconformities, disconformities, paraconformities, words to label the forgetting. But the words do not fill the void. They only name it. Sometimes erosion scrapes the slate clean before the next layer arrives. Sometimes seas retreat, and time slips into the dry wind. Sometimes the chemistry fails, the conditions wrong, the moment lost. Memory, like life, is fragile. It depends on timing, on pressure, on burial, and above all, on luck. There are whole chapters of Earth's story missing. Epochs when life might have changed in ways we'll never know. We can measure the rocks above and below. We can count the isotope shifts, trace the magnetic flips, follow the sediment grain by grain. And still, the interval between them feels like a breath held too long. A pause in the symphony, a skipped line in the poem of time. Maybe these gaps are not just absences but signals. Maybe the silence means something. Could it be that some moments in history were too chaotic to fossilize? Or too soft, too quiet, too quick? Maybe life retreated into places we cannot reach. Into the deep sea, into mud, into forms that left no bones, no shells, no mark strong enough to resist the pull of decay. Entropy favors forgetting, presses on all things equally, blurring sharp edges, loosening bonds, returning order to dust. Fossils are the exception, not the rule. They are the lucky ones. The silent majority of life is unrecorded, unseen, unknown. And in that truth lies a strange kind of humility. We know so little, we hold so few pieces, and yet we build entire histories from them. Delicate scaffolds made of inference and awe. The Earth doesn't mourn its missing memories. It simply continues. Layers build, Mountains rise, seas open and close, and beneath it all the silences wait. Some will never be filled. Others may one day reveal a sliver, a tooth, a shape caught in stone just long enough to resist oblivion. But even if they don't, the silence is still part of the story. In fact, it may be the most honest part, because silence does not lie. It does not embellish. It does not try to be heard. It simply is. A gap not in reality, but in witness. And perhaps that's what makes it feel so alive. These quiet spaces between epochs, these seams of not knowing, invite us to listen differently. Not to what is said, but to what is withheld. Could there have been creatures we'll never imagine? Whole lineages that rose and fell like waves in the dark. What if consciousness flickered briefly in a form we'll never find? What if a single evolutionary leap happened, and then vanished before it could leave a trace? Not because it failed, but because it was forgotten. Or maybe the Earth has other ways of keeping memory. Not just fossils, but minerals. Magnetic patterns in iron grains. Isotope ratios frozen in ancient rain. Crystals that grow in symmetry, echoing the pressure of time. Could it be that even in the gaps, something lingers? A chemical residue, a geologic feeling, a tension between what is seen and what is missed. And if we listen closely enough, not just with instruments but with wonder, we might learn to read the silence as carefully as we read the stone. Because sometimes it is the absence that points most clearly to the shape of what was. Like the outline of a bird where no feathers remain. Like a missing note that makes the melody more haunting. And it makes you wonder, if stories can survive being untold, what other messages might linger in the dark? Not all fossils are made of bone. Not all traces are left by life. Some are left by thought, by design, by hands, by intention. In our world, we've scattered clues. Plastic in the oceans, concrete in the earth, isotopes in the air. We've stamped ourselves into the crust with roads and wires and reinforced glass. We've wrapped the planet in signal, in garbage, in beauty, in noise. And if we vanished tomorrow, some of this would remain. Bits of circuitry sealed in clay. Shards of skyscraper buried in sediment. A flash of iridium from an engine no one remembers. Geologists call them technofossils, fragments of human industry that may one day be found by something else. Not just tools, but the byproducts of civilization itself. Plastiglomerates, alloy shards, synthetic polymers never seen in nature, never shaped by wind or wave. We leave them behind without meaning to. Layers of us forming in parking lots and dumps, in landfills and ocean trenches. Artifacts of the Anthropocene, markers of presence, but also of pressure. But the question isn't just what we will leave behind. The deeper question whispers beneath that. What if we are not the first? What if, long before trilobites, long before even sponges and shells, something rose and thought and fell, and left behind nothing we can see? Could a civilization have bloomed in deep time and vanished before memory began? Not in myth, but in mineral. Not in legend, but in silence. We often assume that intelligence would leave a mark. Cities, tools, bones arranged in deliberate ways. But erosion is a patient force. Subduction swallows whole continents. Ice grinds everything flat. And time forgets. After 500 million years, steel rusts into nothing. Wood becomes vapor. Glass returns to sand. Even the idea of architecture, its shape, its meaning dissolves. Could a society have lived and ended before the Cambrian, and simply been erased? Maybe, maybe not. There are moments, strange ones, when we dig into ancient rock and find anomalies. Odd isotopic spikes, sudden shifts in sediment chemistry, microscopic spheres of metal that shouldn't be there. We explain them: volcanism, asteroid impacts, deep-sea vents. And maybe we're right, or maybe we're reading without the full alphabet. Maybe the silence between strata is louder than we think. And then there is entropy, the force that promises all structures will eventually decay. It's a rule without mercy, but not without poetry, because it means that even the grandest creations must fade. And if they must fade, then maybe only the smallest traces survive. Not cities, but isotopes. Not machines, but molecules. A signature in carbon-13. A distortion in oxygen-18. A shift in the ratios that doesn't quite make sense. Not because it's impossible, but because we're not asking the right questions. Could it be that our own legacy will be read this way? A single layer, thin but strange. A line of plastic, a bloom of synthetic compounds, a sudden spike in radioactive elements. Future geologists, whoever or whatever they may be, will wonder what happened here. What bloomed so suddenly and disappeared just as fast? We like to imagine ourselves as permanent. But permanence is an illusion. Even the dinosaurs, mighty as they were, left behind only scattered bones. The Cambrian, for all its complexity, is a shimmer in shale. If another civilization had risen in the shadows of the Archean or the depths of the Proterozoic, would we know? Would we recognize its mark? Or would we walk past it, mistaking it for stone? And if such a civilization had learned enough about entropy, enough about the deep mathematics of time, maybe it wouldn't leave a trace. Maybe it would erase itself gently, step back from the world with intention, leave behind only balance. No damage, no scar, just a breath now exhaled, a footprint in the sand, wiped clean by tide. Maybe intelligence doesn't scale upward forever. Maybe the peak of knowing is learning how to vanish without harm. Maybe silence itself is a kind of signature. Maybe the cleanest legacy is the one we cannot detect. Could we do the same? Could we choose to be remembered not by what we build, but by what we preserve? Not by what we leave, but by what we don't take. We search the strata for patterns, for clues, for stories. But perhaps the deepest stories are the ones that never made it into stone. Perhaps a great forgetting is itself the memory of something vast, something careful, something kind. And if a forgotten civilization once rose before the Cambrian bloom, then who or what might rise after us? Entropy says that everything falls apart, that order unravels, that heat disperses, patterns dissolve, energy flows only one way. It's a rule written into the fabric of the universe, etched into every atom, every star, every breath. And yet, there was a moment long ago, in the blue hush of Earth's early oceans, when something unfolded in the opposite direction. A bloom, a surge of complexity, life that multiplied not in stillness, but in structure, in variation, in design. It didn't break down, it built upward. The Cambrian defied decay. Not forever, not absolutely, but briefly. It curled around entropy like a question. A pause. A strange countercurrent. Was it oxygen? Rising slowly in the oceans, saturating tissues, fueling metabolisms, unlocking possibilities? Was it the accumulation of genetic scaffolding, enough raw information finally stacked high enough to build something new? Or was it a convergence of pressures and freedoms? Just enough challenge, just enough space, just enough light? Or maybe it was something stranger. Maybe life contains within it a kind of hunger, not for survival but for expression. A need not just to be, but to become. And perhaps in the Cambrian that hunger reached a threshold, not because it had to, but because it could. Could it be that evolution sometimes loops outward, just as entropy loops inward? That for every system breaking down, another briefly knits itself together. Delicately, temporarily, beautifully? The bloom did not last. Complexity rose, yes, but not endlessly. Many of the Cambrian's forms disappeared. Not all lineages thrived. Some, like hallucigenia with its upside-down legs, simply stopped. Others transformed, adjusted, vanished into deeper seas or quieter niches. And yet, the pattern of the bloom left a fingerprint, a momentum, a scaffolding on which future life could build. Vertebrates, lungs, minds. It's easy to see entropy as failure, as loss, as the erosion of meaning. But maybe that's not what it is. Maybe entropy is the canvas, and complexity is the flare of paint upon it. Brief, fragile, intentional. Maybe order needs disorder to shape itself against. Maybe decay is the womb of invention. The rocks remember the bloom. In slabs of shale, the sudden appearance of body plans, so many, so quickly, suggests something more than survival. It suggests exuberance, trial, variation not merely for utility, but for exploration. Could life have been playing? Testing the boundaries of what form could be? If so, the Cambrian wasn't just a step. It was a leap, a gesture, a reach beyond the known. And in that gesture, we glimpse something profound. That complexity is not the opposite of entropy, but a dance with it. That to bloom is not to ignore decay, but to temporarily outpace it. To grow faster than you are lost. To create in the face of dissolution, not to defeat it, but to offer something luminous before the fall. Maybe this is the shape of life's wisdom. It knows it will end, but still it begins. It spreads. It diversifies. It reaches toward the light, toward sensation, toward awareness. Not because it hopes to escape entropy, but because it wishes to bloom while it can. And perhaps that's what we're doing too. Each thought, each breath, each gesture of care or curiosity, an echo of that ancient defiance, a soft rebellion against the tide, a reminder that we come from a moment that bloomed, and that some part of us still carries the impulse to do the same. And it makes you wonder, if complexity can rise like a breath against the pull of time, where else might such a bloom begin again? What surged must fall. After the Cambrian's strange and sudden awakening, after the blooming of limbs and shells in sight, came silence once more. Not all at once, not in a single breath, but in pulses, in quiet waves of vanishing. Life, so recently bold, began to disappear. The record dims. Some bodies no longer appear in the stone. Some voices fall quiet in the fossil beds. Extinction, it seems, was not a distant threat. It was part of the rhythm, a necessary note in the song of deep time. The earth does not hold its creations gently. It gives and it takes. Continents shift. Oceans rise. Oxygen levels swing. Temperatures drift by fractions of degrees. And entire lineages vanish. Not because they failed, but because the world changed just enough. Or too quickly. Or not in their favor. What lived in light dies in shadow. What once thrived in warmth disappears in cold. Sometimes the cause is slow, like climate reshaping itself through the long breath of carbon. Sometimes it is sudden, a pulse of volcanism, a poisoned sea, a silent ripple from an impact far away. Could it be that extinction is not a flaw in the system, but a function of it? Not a mistake, but a cleansing? Not punishment, but pause? A rebalancing of complexity. A breath in after the long breath out. Maybe life does not progress in a line, but in a loop. Expansion, collapse, invention, forgetting. Not because it is inefficient, but because that's how energy flows. How memory resets. How new possibilities emerge. The Cambrian creatures, strange and marvelous as they were, did not stay. Most of them left no descendants. Their branches of the tree were cut before they bore fruit. Yet they mattered. They rehearsed. They played out combinations of form and function the world had never seen. And some of those combinations stuck. Jaws, joints, segments, nerves. The echoes of those innovations ripple through us still. We carry their forgotten experiments in our spines, in our reflexes, in the language of our cells. Extinction is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of another. But still, the erasure stirs something tender in us. Something quiet. Something like grief. Because to imagine a world teeming with forms we will never see again, shapes and motions and soft decisions that disappeared before our kind began, is to feel the weight of deep time. Not as history, but as loss. And yet, extinction is also fertile. The emptiness it leaves becomes room. Space for others. For survivors to adapt. For niches to shift. For landscapes to reorganize their inhabitants. Life surges into absence like water into a hollow. It reshapes itself not because it wants to, but because the pattern demands it. Death feeds life. Decay opens new ground. Collapse becomes corridor. The rocks remember the pulses. Layers stained with iridium. Gaps in biodiversity. Isotope swings that whisper of ocean anoxia, of acid rains, of sunlight dimmed. The strata do not scream, they do not wail, but they mark the moment when abundance faltered, when diversity blinked, when the bloom folded, and we, so far removed, yet made of the same stardust, the same carbon, the same coded sequences, must wonder, is this pattern finished? Or does it continue, subtly, slowly, always humming beneath the surface? Are we, too, in a rehearsal? Are our creations temporary? Maybe life doesn't crescendo. Maybe it rehearses. Maybe every bloom carries the seed of its own forgetting. Not because it wants to vanish, but because it needs to transform. Evolution, after all, is not loyal to form. It is loyal only to what endures. And still we bloom. In thought, in memory, in wonder. Still we imagine futures, even as the past grows dim. Still we reach toward what we do not understand. Perhaps extinction is part of that reaching. A fall, yes, but also a yielding. A shedding of what no longer fits. A necessary breath between one becoming and the next. And it makes you wonder, if extinction is the silence between songs, what other melodies have yet to be heard? Maybe life doesn't invent. Maybe it remembers. Not in a straight line, but in fragments. In dreams. What if evolution, so often imagined as a climb, a ladder, a sequence, was something softer? Something looping, wandering. What if it is not a path forward, but a current drifting through memory? A dreaming mind, not of a species, but of the planet itself. The Earth has no eyes, no voice, no thoughts we recognize. And yet, it behaves like something that recalls. Its rivers trace old courses, carving into bedrock as if retracing forgotten motion. Its mountains rise, only to fold back into themselves, crumpling like pages of an old idea. Its air carries particles that once breathed through trilobites, through ferns, through ammonites. It holds the memory of the Cambrian not only in stone, but in systems, in possibility, in the instructions whispered between generations. DNA is not a script written once. It is a recursive language, shaped by what came before, haunted by what was lost. Inside the cells of every living thing are echoes of ancient patterns. Some still used, some dormant, some decaying slowly in silence. Genes that built fins, then wings, then hands. Codes that once shaped tails, then vanished, then returned again in some other form. The body forgets, and then remembers. Could it be that life dreams? That when conditions align, when warmth, light, chemistry, and time create the perfect silence, evolution doesn't just adapt, but reimagines. Not randomly, but from a deep well of prior forms. Archetypes, templates, ghosts in the code, a trilobite's eye, a jelly's pulse, a mollusk's shell. These shapes emerge again and again, not because they are the best, but because they are familiar. Familiar not to us, but to life itself. Familiar to the memory of a system that has played this game before. Fossil beds tell us that certain body plans appeared, disappeared, and then reappeared, sometimes millions of years later, in species that never touched. Convergent evolution, we call it. As if life, given the same problem, solves it the same way. But what if it's more than that? What if these solutions aren't discovered, but remembered? Recalled by a planetary mind that sleeps in cells and stirs in genes? And just like in dreams, things are not always clear. Shapes bend, functions blur. A limb becomes a fin, becomes a wing, becomes a whisper. Structures drift across time, wearing different names, performing new roles, but always drawn from the same quiet well. Like characters recurring in different plays. Like thoughts you thought were new, but feel too old to be yours. Is evolution a rehearsal? A slow improvisation on themes already known? Or is it a memory made visible? A form of dreaming that spans eons instead of nights? Maybe that's why the fossil record feels both chaotic and intimate. Because we're looking at dreams that once crystallized, momentarily, into bone, into shell, into presence. The record is patchy not because life is incomplete, but because dreams are. They fade, they shift, they return in pieces. Some of them never reach the surface at all. Perhaps there are entire symphonies of life that bloomed in silence, felt by the planet but never fossilized. Entire thoughts that passed through the deep biosphere, through microbes under the sea floor, through sulfur-eating cells at hydrothermal vents, and never became large or loud enough to leave a mark in stone. But still, they were there, felt, imagined. It's tempting to think of the Earth as unconscious, as passive, as a stage, not a player. But the deeper we look, the more that metaphor softens. Chemical cycles move like breath. Magnetic fields flip like moods. Climate pulses with regular irregularity. Glacial, interglacial, like a rhythm too slow to hear. Even plate tectonics behaves like thought, slow and grinding, but directed by invisible tension. A kind of deep cognition written not in neurons but in stone. Could it be that the Earth itself dreams? Not as we do, not in story, but in recurrence, in reemergence, in long loops of memory passed from crust to core, from cell to cell. A dreaming that doesn't sleep, but spirals. And we are part of that dream. We are its expression, not its exception. And if that's true, if the planet dreams through biology, through evolution, through us, then what other memories might still be waiting? Hidden in the genome, waiting in the sediment, folded into the deep ocean floor, carried by currents older than language. Could it be that the next great bloom is not a future we build, but a memory we retrieve? And it makes you wonder, if the Earth remembers this much, what happens when it begins to forget? Some memories fade not through absence, but through touch, through soft repetition, through the slow grace of wearing away. Erosion is not violent. It does not strike or shatter. It waits, presses, it brushes. It hums against the edges of stone and sand like breath against glass. It does not destroy, it reveals. Every ridge was once submerged. Every ripple, once a seafloor, holding the shape of ancient tides. What we now see in cliff and canyon once lay hidden beneath warm currents and drifting plankton. Time lifted them, and erosion unwrapped them. The mountains are not new. They are old stories made visible again, layer by layer, grain by grain. And still, erosion is misunderstood. We call it decay. We frame it as loss. But what if erosion isn't forgetting, but remembering differently? What if it is a way the Earth rewrites its surface, not to erase but to recall? Not because it is breaking down, but because it is uncovering something deeper. Rain does not hammer, it taps, trickles. It falls with intention too slow for us to measure. Wind does not scream, it sings, carries sand like sentences. Ice does not rush, it expands with the hush of centuries. And together, these forces etch memory into rock the way time carves thought into silence. Could it be that erosion is a kind of language? A script of pressure and flow, reshaping the Earth with infinite patience? The Grand Canyon did not appear in a flash. It was whispered into being, carved by a river carrying stories from 100,000 storms. The fjords were sculpted not with force, but with persistence. Ice scraping, water widening, gravity pulling each curve into place like the careful folds of a letter never meant to be opened. Sediments carried downstream do not disappear. They gather in low places, deltas, basins, beds. They collect the forgotten, dust from deserts, ash from fires, pollen from trees that no longer grow, bits of bone, echoes of erosion, and layer by layer, these particles become archives. We drill into them now, reading their chemistry, decoding their isotopes, finding secrets hidden in the balance between carbon and calcium. Each layer a season, each color a clue, each compacted fragment a word in the planet's ongoing diary. Even our own buildings, carved from limestone and granite, eventually surrender to rain. Statues soften, steps wear down, walls crumble, not because we have failed to preserve them, but because the world keeps writing, keeps rewriting, keeps reshaping even the things we try to hold still. And maybe that's what makes them beautiful. Erosion doesn't favor the strong. It favors the soft, the exposed, the open. It seeks the seam, the slope, the smallest imperfection. And through that quiet vulnerability, it creates beauty. Not because it intends to, but because beauty often grows where control is absent. And yet, erosion is not always easy to see. It does not perform. It does not rush. It does not seek witness. It simply happens, constantly, slowly, over spans of time too wide for the human eye. A mountain lowers by millimeters. A coastline shifts by inches. A single grain of sand is freed from stone after 10,000 nights of frost and thaw. And still the work continues. Could it be that erosion is the planet's most faithful historian? Not through what it preserves whole, but through what it reveals in fragments. Maybe the story was always in the worn-down places, the soft edge of a canyon, the curve of a valley, the sediment gathered at the bottom of a lake. Maybe what is left behind is only half the message, and what has been worn away is the other half. And if every grain of sand was once a mountain, every pebble once part of a seabed, then what are we walking on now? What forgotten worlds are beneath our feet, turned to dust not by accident, but by time's gentle persistence? And it makes you wonder, if erosion writes with such patience, how long must we listen before we understand what it's trying to say? There are clocks that don't tick, clocks that don't chime or hum. They do not count time in seconds or hours, but in particles, in quiet decay. Deep within the heart of matter, atoms change. Not quickly, not loudly, but steadily, predictably. Their transformations are invisible but constant, like the soft exhale of something older than language, older than the earth itself. These are the isotope clocks, timekeepers not made by us, but discovered. Uranium, thorium, carbon, each element with a rhythm, each nucleus with a plan it doesn't know it follows. An atom becomes another, not all at once, but in halves. One half, then half of the rest, then half again. This is how time moves down here, not in footsteps, but in fractions. We call it the half-life, not because the atom is only half real, but because its transformation is never whole. It is a fade, not a fall. A long surrender to entropy that tells us, quietly, how long something has been waiting. A piece of zircon in a mountain may carry uranium that has been ticking for billions of years. With it, we can date the age of the crust, the age of cooling, the age of the beginning of memory itself. Could it be that atoms are remembering in ways we can barely comprehend? That each isotope is a storyteller, but only if we ask the right questions. We extract these clocks from crystals, from bones, from meteorites. We count the ratios, parent to daughter, uranium to lead, potassium to argon, carbon to nitrogen. We measure the residue, and through it we see, not with eyes, but with equations. We rebuild lost timelines, the formation of continents, the layering of volcanic ash, the age of a fish that lived and died before the first forest stood. And still, these clocks keep ticking. They do not stop when buried. They do not rush or pause. Even in darkness, even under miles of rock, they continue. Their constancy is comforting, almost sacred, a signal in the noise, a rhythm that endures even when everything else changes. The earth may forget, but atoms remember. Maybe that's why we trust them. Not because we control them, but because we don't. They move at their own pace, untouched by temperature, by light, by motion. The decay of rubidium or samarium, the patient shift of neodymium or strontium, these are not just tools. They are records, proof that time has a structure, even when we feel lost inside it. And yet, there's something strange about using decay to measure history, something poetic. We think of decay as ending, as ruin, but here it is revelation. The atom falls apart, and through that unraveling we gain clarity. The loss becomes a window, the instability becomes truth. Could it be that all knowing requires a little letting go? That to see the past, something must first be broken? We trace isotope trails across the globe. In ice cores, in tree rings, in lake sediments, in ocean mud. Carbon-14 in bones tells us how long ago a mammoth walked. Lead-206 tells us how long a rock has rested in place. These ratios are the fingerprints of time. Not fixed, but interpretive. Not absolute, but trusted. They allow us to see without seeing. to hear without sound, and through them, forgotten worlds begin to glow again, not in full detail, not in color, but in outline, in shadow, in temperature curves and atmospheric clues, the rise and fall of oxygen, the flicker of volcanic activity, the brief bloom of radiocarbon in the wake of human industry. Maybe one day our layer in the strata will be read the same way, a spike in isotopes, a shimmer of cesium, a strange moment in the long line of ratios where everything briefly changed, where clocks sped up, then slowed, then vanished, and it makes you wonder, if even atoms can tell time, what other quiet things have been counting all along? In the Cambrian seas, long before vertebrates rose and long before memory had muscle, bodies moved that now feel impossible. Bodies with 5 eyes, bodies with sideways mouths, bodies stitched from patterns we no longer see in the living world. Creatures like Anomalocaris, with its rotating plates and grasping limbs, drifting through the water like a question no longer asked. Or Opabinia, with its soft trunk and backward-facing gaze, crawling along the seabed as if stitched from discarded dreams. These were lives we wouldn't recognize now, not as relatives, not as ancestors. And yet, somehow, we are not separate from them. Not entirely. Their designs feel foreign, but the instructions that built them hum inside us still. Not because we remember them clearly, but because biology never forgets completely. Evolution is not efficient, it is generous. It does not erase what it can instead reuse. It borrows. It loops. It repeats with variation. And in that slow repetition, ancient patterns ripple forward. Their strange bodies become our familiar echoes. Could it be that your own body holds shadows of these forgotten forms? That somewhere inside your genome, buried beneath layers of newer instruction, older motifs still whisper? The way your hands segment, the way your eyes trace motion, the way your nerves branch like coral in a tide. Shapes born in the Cambrian, altered, softened, but not truly gone. The fossil beds show us the outlines. Their nervous systems, their limbs, their mouths, all alien in appearance. But molecular traces suggest something deeper. Genes that built these creatures have analogs in modern ones. Developmental blueprints, quietly reused across time. Hox genes, segmentation, the wiring of early brains. All carried forward not by intention, but by survival. Not because they were the best, but because they worked just well enough. And so, through the accidents of reproduction, the echoes spread. Even in their strangeness, these creatures were part of the same conversation. The same grand experiment of life, testing shapes, trying motion, sketching out possible futures. Anomalocaris was among the first active predators, a swimmer with vision, with tools, with choices. Opabinia may have used its flexible proboscis to probe, to taste, to manipulate. These are not primitive animals. They are pioneers. Improvisations in a sea of potential. And we are built atop their improvisations. It is tempting to view the Cambrian as distant, a place of monsters, of failed paths, but perhaps it's closer than we think. Perhaps the forms we call strange were simply earlier versions of a shared thought, a design life returned to again and again, edited and rearranged with each iteration, like a melody that resurfaces in different songs. Like a dream that lingers in the morning, though its shape has changed. Maybe that's what evolution is, not a march forward, but a rhythm, a pulse of memory, a soft remixing of the possible. And so when we see Opabinia and its 5 stalked eyes, we should not laugh or recoil or call it a mistake. We should listen. We should ask what it tried to be, what it offered, what it explored. Because some part of us still listens to those lessons, even now. Our bodies are built from bones and nerves and blood, but also from forgotten attempts, from silenced forms, from creatures who failed but gave us the parts we needed. And just as we carry them, perhaps we too will echo forward. Perhaps some distant creature will one day carry a fragment of our design, our hands, our hearts, our symmetry, not because we endured, but because something in us was useful, or beautiful, or simply available. Could it be that life is not so much about lineage, but about echo? That evolution is not a tree, but a chorus? That strange bodies, even if they vanish, still shape the songs that follow? We call them extinct, but that word may be too final, too still. The truth is, they dissolved into us, into everything that followed. They are not absent, they are diffused, and it makes you wonder, if even the strangest lives leave a trace in us, how many others still echo, unheard, beneath the surface? The Earth breathes, not like we do, not in seconds or sighs, but in slow planetary inhalations. Across tens of millions of years, it takes a breath in, and then it exhales. Carbon dioxide rises, falls, drifts across epochs like vapor across glass. In the Cambrian, the air was thick with it, CO2 levels far higher than today. A sky not blue, but blurred. A world that breathed differently, slower, deeper, fuller. A breath not measured by lungs, but by oceans, rocks, volcanoes, and silence. We trace these breaths now in ice cores, though no ice remains from the Cambrian. We study isotope trails left behind in ancient limestone, in stromatolites, in shelled things that once floated just beneath the waves. Carbon-13, oxygen-18 ratios that move with the atmosphere, shift with the seasons of deep time. We read them like heartbeats, not regular, not always calm, but rhythmic, alive. Could it be that the planet's atmosphere is not just chemistry, but memory? In the Cambrian, warmth wrapped the world. There were no polar ice caps. Shallow seas flooded the continents, sunlit and rich with calcium and light. Life drank from this warmth. It multiplied, tested form and motion, and all the while, the Earth exhaled carbon, through tectonic breath, through mid-ocean ridges, through volcanic sighs that rose through seawater and sky. A greenhouse world, not in crisis, but in bloom. Not yet unstable, but exploratory. But climate is never still. It moves like music, looping, bending, repeating in altered keys. The carbon that once filled the air began to fall, drawn into limestone, into shells, into the bodies of tiny things that died and settled into seafloor mud. Burial after burial, they were locked away, compacted, turned to stone. And the sky slowly thinned. The temperature shifted. Currents changed. Perhaps that's why the bloom of life slowed. Why extinction came in waves, soft and strange. Not a single catastrophe, but a long exhale. We sometimes think of climate as external, as background, but it is not separate from life. It is shaped by life, altered by breath, by decay, by every cell that ever fed or bloomed or died. Even the tiniest plankton has the power to shift the balance of the sky. In the Cambrian, this relationship was new, not because Earth had never had climate before, but because life had never participated so deeply in its rhythms. And now we look back. We analyze sediment cores taken from the depths of ancient seabeds. We examine the calcium shells of creatures long extinct. We model the isotopic fingerprints of different gases, buried under rock older than mountains. The data is faint, fragmented, but it speaks, not loudly, not clearly, but enough. We learn that the Cambrian air pulsed with change, that weather patterns perhaps followed different rules, that storms may have drifted slower, that the sun itself, younger then, burned a little dimmer, but the atmosphere compensated with thicker warmth, and that the oceans, those ancient lungs, exchanged carbon in cycles far less stable than ours today. Maybe that's why the Cambrian feels so dreamlike, because it was a time not just of biological experiment, but of planetary improvisation. A new kind of breathing, a first dance between atmosphere and organism, an unfolding partnership between stone and skin, water and weather, carbon and life. Could it be that the Earth's climate doesn't just change, but listens? That it shifts in response not just to physics, but to the presence of intention, to the quiet tug of photosynthesis, to the long patience of evolution, that each atmospheric fluctuation is not simply reaction, but relationship? And if so, then the atmosphere itself becomes a kind of diary, written in vapor, in ash, in gas. It does not store memory in shelves or pages, but in ratios, in density, in trace elements that drift for eons before resting in rock. The sky forgets quickly, but the sediments beneath it do not. And it makes you wonder, if the planet once breathed differently, what did the air remember then that we have long since let go? Nothing lasts forever. Not shells, not teeth, not even the mountains themselves. And yet, sometimes something endures, not in its fullness, not whole, but in imprint, in residue, in mineral shadow. Fossilization is not preservation. It is permission, a slow agreement between decay and memory, a rare moment when the earth, usually so eager to recycle, chooses instead to pause. And remember, most of life disappears without a trace. Soft bodies collapse into mud. Skin dissolves into silence. Cartilage becomes a whisper. Of the billions of creatures that once moved through Cambrian tides, only a sliver remain. Their names we do not know. Their colors we cannot guess. Their thoughts, if they had them, are gone. But some, a few, left behind a shape, a mark, a record of having once been. Fossilization does not favor the dramatic. It favors the lucky. A body must be buried quickly, gently, before scavengers arrive, before bacteria erase, before oxygen unwinds the organic into dust. It must settle into sediment fine enough to hold its outline, firm enough to resist collapse, deep enough to escape the churn of currents and time. And then, over years that stretch longer than continents, the transformation begins. Molecules are replaced. Cells become crystal. Bone becomes stone. And what was once living becomes earth. But something lingers. Not life. Not death. Something in between. Could it be that a fossil is a kind of echo? Not of sound, but of form. A second self made not of flesh, but of patience. Of minerals. Of pressure. We say the trilobite is extinct, and that's true. But still, it looks at us from slate and shale, its ridges preserved, its eyes forever caught mid-glance. Not alive, but not entirely absent either. Some fossils are detailed, so detailed they catch even the soft parts. Gills, feathers, skin. In the rarest cases, even cells. As if time paused just long enough to make a mold of a moment. A fossilized jellyfish. A leaf pressed into volcanic ash. A fish caught in the act of swimming, stopped mid-motion by a sudden storm of silt. These are not just bones of light. They are instants crystallized. Fossilization is selective. It forgets more than it keeps. It is not fair. It is not kind. But it is honest. What is kept is what the earth allows. What it chooses, not with intention, but with circumstance. And so we reconstruct from fragments. Tooth here, a spine there, partial shell, a scattering of plates. Each piece a puzzle, each absence a question. The silence between bones sometimes louder than the bones themselves. And still we listen. We hold the fossils in our hands. We cast them in plaster, scan them in light, whisper their names across museum halls. But we don't just see them as objects. We see them as mirrors, as reminders, that life leaves marks, that even in the face of entropy, some things linger. Some shapes are too persistent, too curious, too quietly determined to vanish without trace. Could it be that fossilization is not just a geological process, but a kind of promise? A reluctant one, a rare one, but a promise nonetheless, that something can be remembered, that a moment, a body, a motion can defy time, if only barely, if only partially. And perhaps this is the closest thing life has to immortality. Not the continuation of the self, but the endurance of form, of outline, of presence once had. We will not be fossils, most of us. Our bodies will return to soil, to air, to water. But still, maybe something of us might be found. A footprint, a tooth, a pattern in the dust of a city long buried. A technofossil, a strange alloy sealed in stone. And if someone someday holds it in their hands, will they see us in it? Will they feel a flicker of recognition? Will they wonder, as we wonder now, about the world before the forgetting? And it makes you wonder, if fossilization is a promise to remember, what else has the earth promised to keep? Before the skies turned blue, before light danced unbroken across the continents, earth wore a different face, a veil of haze and shadow, thick with gases we could not breathe. The air was heavier then, not with oxygen but with carbon and methane and silence. And in the oceans, hidden beneath the sunless shimmer, iron drifted freely, unbound, like dust in a forgotten room. The sky above was not a window, but a shroud. Not blue, but muted, rusted, still. In those early days, there was no ozone, no shield, no breath of forests. Only water and stone and time. The atmosphere hung close to the ground, dense with particles, cloaking the world in a metallic sigh. It was not a sky to gaze at, it was a ceiling, a lid, a waiting, and then something stirred. Life had already begun, quietly, in the shallows and the warm seafloor vents. Tiny, invisible forms, microbes clinging to rock and light. But among them, a particular kind of organism, cyanobacteria, began to do something strange. Took sunlight, took water, and it split them. Slowly, quietly, it began to breathe out oxygen. Not because it meant to change the world, but because that was simply how it lived. Oxygen, at first, did not fill the sky. It had work to do. It met with the iron in the oceans and latched onto it, forming minerals, rusting the seas red. The iron fell, layer by layer, into the ocean beds, becoming the banded iron formations we find today. Stripes of memory, still visible in rock that once lay beneath waves. Each stripe a breath, each layer a day in which life quietly exhaled, and the planet slowly listened. Could it be that the sky's color is not just an effect, but an inheritance? As the iron was buried, and the oxygen began to accumulate, the atmosphere began to change. The haze thinned, the shroud lifted, and for the first time the sky turned blue, not because the sky wanted to be beautiful, but because the physics of light and the chemistry of breath finally allowed it. What we now see as ordinary was once unthinkable. A slow unveiling, an ancient emergence. The first blue sky was not just a view, it was an arrival. And still the oxygen rose, changed everything. It allowed larger bodies, powered more complex cells. It rewrote the rules of metabolism. But it also brought danger. Oxygen is reactive. It burns, corrodes. To some early life it was poison. Entire ecosystems collapsed beneath this new breath. The great oxidation event, we call it now. A quiet catastrophe. A planetary exhale that gave birth to everything and ended much. Atmospheric change is not always visible. But the clues remain, in sulfur isotopes, in trapped bubbles inside ancient ice, in the minerals that only form under oxidized conditions. The story of the sky is written underground, not in color, but in chemistry, and we read it like myth, not because it's untrue, but because it happened on a scale so vast it slips into legend. Maybe the sky itself is an artifact, a living fossil we look through every day without noticing. It reflects back not just light, but the memory of 1 billion years of breath, of change, of chance. And it makes you wonder, if even the color of the sky can forget what it once was, what else have we mistaken for permanence? Now imagine drifting, but not across a map, not between coasts or toward any shore. Imagine drifting through a world without edge, without horizon, without shape. A sea so wide and featureless that direction itself dissolves. This was the Cambrian Ocean. Not calm, but boundless. Not empty, but unfamiliar. There were no coral reefs, no kelp forests, no continental shelves as we know them. No sunlit beaches. No mountains to anchor the mind. Just water and gravity and motion. Life here floated not with purpose but with instinct, with touch, with hope. In this soft blue world, sound would have felt different. Not sharp, not echoing, but muffled, dissolved in distance. Pulse here, a flicker there, nothing to reflect against. No walls, no corners, just the slow vibration of limbs brushing current, of cilia stirring fluid, of something nearby or nothing at all. To move in this world was not to travel. It was to feel, to respond, to guess. Could it be that life began with this kind of uncertainty, not as a weakness but as a necessity? The Cambrian was a time of awakening bodies. Soft, unfamiliar structures, many with no eyes, no central brain, no spine to steady them. They moved by waves of muscle or by the cilia of cells, or by letting the current choose their direction. They navigated using pressure, using light gradients, using chemical trails suspended in the water like invisible maps only they could read. No coordinates, no up or down, just gradients of warmth, of darkness, of hunger. And still they survived. Some had tiny hairs that felt the flow. Some had light-sensitive pits that could detect where the shadows deepened. Some simply followed the vibrations, touch as language, movement as signal. A drifting worm could detect a predator not by seeing it, but by the sudden hush of water as it approached. In a world without structures, every ripple mattered. Every pulse might be presence, or absence, or danger, or life. Maybe perception was born here. Not sight, not thought, but sensation. Maybe consciousness didn't begin with awareness of the world, but with awareness of change in the world. A twitch, a tilt, a pull, a whisper through fluid, saying, something is near, and still, there was no horizon, no line to separate the sea from sky, no fixed position. Even the seafloor, when reached, offered no comfort. Too was soft, layered in silt and silence. And so to live in this space was to live in ambiguity, in motion without map, existence without edges. Could it be that this is still the way we live in some quiet part of ourselves? Even now, our inner ears, those delicate, coiled organs of balance, evolved first in the sea, built to detect motion in fluid, to keep us upright not on land, but in liquid. Our blood has the same salinity as ancient oceans. Our cells still swim in water. And maybe our sense of orientation, of knowing where we are, is a kind of illusion layered over something deeper, something older, something that never needed a horizon at all. The Cambrian world didn't offer certainty, but it offered space, room to explore, to try, to drift. And in that drifting, bodies grew stranger, more sensitive, more curious. Some evolved armor, some evolved fins, some evolved silence, becoming small enough to pass unnoticed, light enough to float forever. And it makes you wonder, if the first explorers didn't know what they were seeking, could discovery itself have been the reason they survived? To live is to begin disappearing. Not all at once, not visibly, but gradually, gently. The moment life starts, decay follows, not as punishment but as pattern. Even the most vibrant cells carry within them the seed of soft unraveling. And perhaps that unraveling isn't an ending. Perhaps it's the beginning of something else. We are taught to see decay as failure, as collapse. But what if decay is a form of transformation? A quiet, necessary hand that shapes not just death, but memory? Without decay, there is no fossilization. Without rot, there is no release. Pressure, heat, stillness. None of it matters unless the body softens first, unless it yields, unless the bonds that once held a life together are allowed to slip apart. It begins in silence. A body settles on the seafloor, not noticed, not special, just another part of the drift. And then decay arrives, not with violence, but with patience. Bacteria feed, enzymes loosen, tissue fades. The shape begins to change, to empty, to open. This isn't destruction. It's preparation, clearing out, a making of space. Could it be that memory requires this kind of unmaking? That something must dissolve in order for something else to be written? As decay works, minerals begin to seep in. From the water, from the sediment, from the bones themselves. Calcite, silica, pyrite. They fill the spaces left behind. They trace the hollow. They recreate the shape in stone. What once pulsed with blood now gleams with crystal. What once bent and flexed now rests, unmoving, beneath layers of time. But the curve remains, the outline, the gesture of life, stilled but not lost. Fossil beds, those quiet fields of stone, are built by decay. Entire ecosystems remembered not in the moment of living, but in the act of being let go. Rot and pressure, silence and burial, they work together, not because they mean to, but because they must. It is their nature to preserve by transforming, to carry a body into stone, not by resisting decay, but by embracing it. And still, most life vanishes completely. The majority of all that ever lived leaves no fossil, no trace, no layer in rock. But for the few that do, decay is the first collaborator, the invisible artist shaping the way forward. Without it, nothing would fossilize. Without it, the past would have no shape. Maybe entropy isn't only a force of forgetting. Maybe it's also a storyteller. Maybe the universe unravels not to erase, but to revise, to redraw, to reframe. In this way, decay becomes a sculptor, pressure becomes a brush, time becomes a chisel. We see this in the blackened outlines of fern leaves, flattened into shale, in the soft bodies of jellyfish, preserved in the thinnest films, in bones turned to opal, in feathers ghosted in stone. Each image made possible by what was taken away, each memory carved by the slow hands of rot and silence. Could it be that even in us, decay is always at work, not only in the body but in the mind? That forgetting, too, is a kind of creativity? That what slips through, what falls away, makes room for new meaning? Geologically, decay is part of the cycle. Organic matter breaks down, feeds the soil, it enriches the sediment. It becomes fuel. Coal beds, oil deposits, gas reserves, these are not just resources. They are condensed memory, forgotten forests, compressed sunlight, ancient breath held underground, waiting to be released. And perhaps that release too is part of the story. We often mourn what decays. We fear the softening, but life has always depended on it. There is no new without the letting go of old. There is no formation without dissolution. The cells we shed make room for others. The leaves that fall feed the forest floor. The world builds on its breakdowns, and it makes you wonder, if decay is how the earth remembers, then what is it remembering now? For nearly 300 million years, trilobites moved across the ocean floor. Not in a hurry, not as invaders, but as witnesses. In the soft hush of ancient seas, they scuttled over silt and sand, through tides thick with plankton, beneath skies not yet known to color. Their bodies were small, but their story was long. Longer than the dinosaurs, longer than trees, longer than memory usually allows. They lived in silence, but not in stillness. The trilobites were many things: hunters, grazers, scavengers, floaters. Some were blind. Some had complex eyes made of crystal. Some rolled into armored spirals to rest or defend. Others wandered in lines, their limbs ticking like soft metronomes across the seabed. They were not strange to their world. They were the world, part of the breathing machinery of the planet. Moving through extinction and emergence, through supercontinent collisions and the quiet rearrangement of oceans, they endured not by dominating, but by adapting. Could it be that endurance itself is a kind of intelligence? That to live gently through so many ages is its own form of wisdom? They were there when the seas first filled with oxygen, when the early predators emerged with teeth and vision and strategy. They were there when the first reefs began to rise, when the continents drifted apart, when mountain ranges crumbled into shorelines. For 270 million years, they walked through every chapter of Earth's deep awakening, carving tiny trails behind them in the mud, like sentences lost to time. And we know them not by what they said, but by what they left behind. Fossil beds filled with their husks, some perfect, some fragmented, mark the ancient coastlines of forgotten seas. Their exoskeletons, made of calcite and protein, were built for molting. Each time they grew, they shed a part of themselves, and the earth, by chance or care, kept some of those castings, as if it too knew they mattered. What did they feel as the planet changed beneath them? Not thought, perhaps, not emotion as we know it, but response, resonance. Did they sense the thinning of the atmosphere, the warming and cooling of currents? Did they adjust not in fear, but in rhythm? We often think of intelligence in terms of tools, of speech, of fire. Trilobites were not dramatic, but they were diverse. Over 20,000 species are known, and likely more remain buried, waiting. They experimented with form, spines, ridges, lobes, fringes. They sculpted themselves over eons, not to conquer, but to belong. Every adaptation was a whisper to the earth, a question. Is this what you need now? Maybe that's why their fossils feel like messages. Their ridges trace ancient light. Their eyes, now stone, once read the water like language. Even now, they show up in stones we break open, curled in rest, as if they never left. Their whispers are not words, but reminders that life doesn't always need to be loud, that meaning can be worn, not spoken. What did they know that we've forgotten? Perhaps it's this: that change is not the enemy, that time is not a thing to fight, that the world doesn't ask us to remain the same, it only asks us to respond. With softness, with shape, with motion. Trilobites didn't resist the earth. They moved with it, they molded to it, they listened for what was next. And when, at last, their time ended at the edge of the Permian, they left not with noise but with silence. A silence we now study, a silence filled with form. And it makes you wonder, if we could learn to listen as they did, what might the earth be whispering now? Even now, in the silence of your cells, something ancient hums. Not loud, not clear, but persistent, like a lullaby whose words have faded but whose rhythm still rocks the body gently, without needing to be understood. Within every living thing is a record not written in ink or stone, but in code. A spiral, a sequence, a soft thread of chemical memory wound into the nucleus of almost every cell. DNA older than language, older than thought. A molecular echo of worlds we barely remember. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even speak. It loops. Coiled in that spiral are messages from ancestors whose names we'll never know. Not only from mammals or fish or reptiles, but from creatures that crawled along Cambrian seafloors. From soft-bodied organisms that blinked into being in ancient oceans, whose forms would seem alien now, yet whose instructions linger in us still. Fragments of their code, snippets that once built gills or filaments or eyes made of calcite, now reside inside lungs, limbs, bone, and breath. Could it be that we are not just descendants of life, but its repetition? DNA mutates, yes. It shifts. It adapts. But it doesn't forget easily. Much of the code we carry isn't active, not anymore. It lies dormant, like rooms sealed off in a vast cathedral. But the structure remains. The blueprint is still there. Evolution rarely throws anything away. It layers instead. It loops. It reuses. And because of that, pieces of Cambrian time still flicker in our flesh. When biologists map the genome, they sometimes find genes that do nothing or seem to. They call them vestigial, leftover, non-coding. But maybe they're lullabies. Maybe they once meant something, or still mean something we don't yet know how to read. Ancient instructions written in a dialect too old for our tools to decode. And still, they persist. They hum. They wait. This continuity is not linear. It folds. It returns to itself. Just like Earth's geology, just like erosion, just like extinction and bloom. DNA is not a straight path, it's a spiral staircase where each step echoes the last, but from a new angle. And when we look at the history of life, we don't see simple ascent. We see echoes, limbs that emerge, then vanish, eyes that evolve, disappear, and reappear, patterns that surface across species, across time, across oceans. Maybe this is how life remembers, not in clarity, but in rhythm. Within us, there are genes responsible for body plans, Hox genes, conserved for over 500 million years. They are the architects of structure, the quiet designers of where a head should go, where a spine should form, where segments should divide. Trilobites had them. So do butterflies. So do humans. These genes don't care what the creature looks like. They only care that it is, that the body has a map, that the parts know their places. And so the same foundational codes loop through time, shaping creatures that look nothing alike, but are built by the same hands. Could it be that life is not inventing so much as recomposing, playing the same melody with new instruments, new tempos, new tones? Perhaps this is why evolution feels so full of déjà vu. Why wings appear again and again in insects, in birds, in bats. Why eyes emerge in jellyfish, in squids, in humans. Why symmetry, segmentation, sensation return in body after body, across extinction, across continents. These aren't copies. They're memories. Memories that never stopped looping. Maybe we don't evolve from the past, but through it. And yet, DNA is not perfect. It stutters. It breaks. It drifts. But even in its errors, there is story. Mutations that led to new shapes, new skills, new failures. Small accidents that open vast doors. A miscopied letter here, a deletion there. And from those tiny slips, whales, flowers, wings, thought, perhaps even this, the voice you're hearing, the breath you're taking. It's easy to think of ourselves as separate from those Cambrian waters, from those soft creatures with no eyes, no spine, no voice. But deep in our marrow, we carry pieces of their code. We are not their descendants. We are their continuation. And it makes you wonder, if so much of the past still loops inside us, how much of the future has already begun? And it makes you wonder, if so much of the future has already begun, why do we keep imagining it in a straight line? We are storytellers by nature. We draw arrows. We build ladders. We map beginnings to ends, always searching for a peak, a point, a purpose. But the earth does not climb. It drifts. It folds. It breathes in spirals. And evolution, that slow shaper of form and function, is not a march forward. It is a wandering dance in deep time. Cambrian life knew this. It wore no crown. It bore no plan. It simply emerged, strange, tentative, and full of surprise. Look closely at the fossil beds, and you won't find steady improvement. You'll find oddities, asymmetries, experiments, creatures with 5 eyes and none, mouths on undersides, spines where heads should be, not because evolution didn't know what it was doing, but because it didn't need to know. There was no blueprint, only the endless rehearsal of possibility. What could work? What might survive? What would echo long enough to ripple into the next breath? And so it tried, and tried again, not climbing toward us, not building a better future, but weaving through the present. Cambrian seas were not steps on a staircase toward modern life. They were their own world, complete, enough. We were not their goal. We were not even imagined. It's tempting to look back and see direction because we know how it turned out. We see the path that led to fish, to amphibians, to mammals, to us. But for every path that continued, there were dozens more that stopped. Whole branches of life that shimmered briefly and disappeared. Their endings are not failures. They are part of the shape, part of the music, like notes played once in a song that needed only to be heard in that moment. Maybe evolution isn't about getting somewhere. Maybe it's about being somewhere over and over again in different ways through different forms. Maybe the reason some things last is not because they were best, but because they were lucky. The right pressure, the right climate, the right isotope trail. Not survival of the fittest, but survival of the fitting, what fit for just long enough. Some of the creatures we call primitive lasted longer than the ones we call advanced. Trilobites walked the seabed for over 270 million years. Opabinia, strange as it was, left no living air, but maybe its shape wasn't meant to last. Maybe it was meant to be fleeting, like a breath, like a dream. Not everything that vanishes is forgotten, and not everything that survives is inevitable. Even now, the code inside us meanders. Mutations don't follow goals. They follow chance. A slip, a shuffle, a change in temperature, a hiccup in replication. And from that randomness, something new, sometimes beautiful, sometimes strange, sometimes nothing at all. And yet it continues, not because it must, but because it can. Could it be that evolution doesn't climb, but loops, dances, and folds into itself? Could it be that we are not the summit, but just one more melody in a long, strange song? Maybe there are no peaks, no perfect forms, just motion, just change, just time carving its spirals into the crust. Geology reminds us of this too. Rocks are not layered in clean order. Straight a twist, break, fold, subduct. Some layers rise, others disappear. Earth erases as much as it records, and so does life. It forgets, it rewrites, it meanders. And yet, if even forgetting is part of the pattern, what else might be hidden in the loops? Beneath the fossils we recognize, below the Cambrian's radiant bloom, deeper than trilobite trails or the segmented symmetry of creatures with eyes, there are ruins. Not of temples, not of tools, but of life's first cities. Quiet ones, slow ones, invisible unless you know how to look. These were not built of stone. They were made of cells, of filaments and film, of chemistry and patience. They left behind no monuments. And yet, in their own quiet way, they ruled the world. For billions of years, before spines and shells, before even complex cells had awakened, Earth belonged to microbes. Not in patches, but in continents. Entire ecosystems of single-celled beings, layered in sticky mats and breathing in cycles. We call them stromatolites now, ancient microbial reefs that grew upward in shallow seas, one film at a time, one layer per sunbeam. Their lives moved slowly, like continents drift, but they built, they shaped, they changed everything. Some of them released oxygen, long before lungs knew how to use it. Others made food from sunlight. Others, still, burrowed through chemical gradients, moving in response to invisible whispers in the water. And as they lived and multiplied, they exhaled transformation. They changed the oceans. They altered the sky. And eventually they turned the planet blue. But they did not leave behind bones. No skeletons to fossilize. No hard parts to endure. What remains of them is mineral memory. Stone domes layered like tree rings, each ripple a calendar of breath. We find them in Australia, in South Africa, in places once submerged in warm Cambrian shallows. We walk over them, we drill through them, and still we do not fully understand them. Were these microbial mats civilizations? Not in the way we imagine, no cities, no roads, no language. But maybe they were something even older. A kind of consciousness not built from minds but from patterns. Networks of response and rhythm. They sensed light. They reacted to change. They formed alliances. Cyanobacteria mingled with sulfur eaters. Filamentous microbes laid scaffolds for others to cling. They formed colonies that grew, moved, and sometimes collapsed only to rise again elsewhere. Is that not a kind of story? Maybe civilization doesn't require intention. Maybe it just needs time. And microbes had time, millions upon millions of years, uninterrupted, unhurried. Their empires were not measured in years, but in epochs. Not because they endured, but because they repeated. Not because they expanded, but because they endured. We rarely speak of them when we talk about the history of life. They are too small, too quiet, too slow. But it was their patience that made the Cambrian possible. The oxygen they gave shaped the seas, allowed energy to flow, allowed complexity to breathe. Without their long preparation, the bloom we marvel at would never have unfolded. And yet, we don't find their stories in museums. We don't carve them into stone. We forget they were the first to build. Could it be that memory favors the visible? That what we call history is only what leaves behind a hard trace? And if so, how much has already been lost, not erased but softened beyond detection? Beneath every trilobite fossil, beneath every stratified rock, could there still be echoes of chemical whispers, of life too delicate to leave a mark? Even today, microbes remain the foundation. They live inside us, around us, beneath the crust, in the ice, in the clouds. They shape our climate, cycle our nutrients, sculpt our soil. They persist not in monuments but in presence. Maybe they don't need to be remembered, because they never left. And so, when we speak of civilization, when we dream of great beginnings, we might look further back, to the time when life's first architects built empires out of light, breath, and biofilm. They had no eyes, no voice, no map, but they wove the stage upon which all else would play. And yet, if that much can be buried beneath stone, what else might we have forgotten? We often imagine life as something loud, something that announces itself with motion, with color, with teeth. But not all life wants to be seen. Not all life leaves a mark. Some things, perhaps most things, live gently, pass through time without scars, and return to the quiet from which they came. And so, perhaps silence is not the absence of life, but a kind of life itself. The fossil record is full of noise, bones, shells, the mineral ghosts of what once moved through ocean and mud. But there are gaps between those markers. Wide ones. Eras where the rock layers seem too still. We name them unconformities. Intervals where nothing remains. But does that mean nothing lived? Or just that what lived didn't want to be remembered? Soft-bodied life is notoriously shy in the fossil record. Muscles dissolve. Membranes vanish. Nerve clusters and tiny translucent forms melt into silt before rock can form. And yet, these creatures, these silent beings, may have outnumbered the fossilized ones 1,000-fold. Maybe even more. Whole populations that never hardened. Species that passed through deep time like breath through glass. What if these were not exceptions, but the rule? Life didn't begin with exoskeletons. It began with yielding, with fragility, with membranes that flexed, flowed, and let the world pass through. These early organisms lived in the gentle border between water and chemistry. They floated, absorbed, drifted. Some, perhaps, were little more than moving skin. Others, simple strings of code wrapped in film. No armor, no fossil, but alive all the same. And we know they were there not because we see them, but because we see their effects. Chemical whispers in the strata. Ratios of isotopes nudged out of balance. Sediments shaped in ways that suggest movement, metabolism, community. Traces that say, something was here, even when the body is gone. Could it be that silence leaves its own kind of fossil? A void that only absence could shape? Even now, in modern oceans, soft-bodied beings rule the depths. Jellyfish drift in numbers too vast to count. Plankton rise and fall with the tides, unseen but essential. Deep under the seafloor, entire ecosystems of microbial life thrive in darkness, exchanging minerals like breath. No skeletons, no songs, just rhythm, just being. Perhaps the Cambrian Explosion did not invent complexity, but merely fossilized what had always been hidden. When hard parts evolved, spines, shells, teeth, the rock record lit up. But the soft ones had always been there, moving in secret. And maybe they still are. Is it possible that we live surrounded by species we cannot name? Not because they are new, but because they are quiet? Because they do not need us to notice? In ancient mudstone, we find strange impressions. Not bones, not shells, just disturbances. Patterns that suggest something once curled there, or moved through, or lay still for a moment before being erased. These are the ghosts of the gentle, the records of those who lived without trace, who belonged to the world but never claimed it. And isn't that a kind of wisdom? To live without conquering, to exist without echo, to touch the earth so lightly that even time forgets your name. What if these beings are the true elders? The quiet thread running beneath the louder bursts of evolution, not because they endured through violence, but because they adapted through stillness. Geologists call this kind of preservation exceptional. But what if the exception is simply our understanding? We collect what's visible. We study the things that scream. But maybe life's deepest secrets lie in what does not insist. In the species that bend instead of break. In those who flow around extinction rather than fight it. In those who dissolve into mud with no fear of being lost. Silence, too, evolves, finds new forms. It shifts from jelly to mist to shadow. And it teaches us, if we listen. Maybe we're only now beginning to hear them. The world has always been full of presences we cannot see. Atmospheric microbes, deep-buried bacteria, ancient strands of RNA flickering in thermal vents. Life without fanfare, intelligence without ego, silence not as a void but as a kind of memory. And if silence has memory, what stories does it keep? What possibilities have floated past us, unnoticed? What species touched this world with such softness that only the chemistry of rocks can recall them? Maybe not all life needs to be remembered in the way we expect. Maybe it is enough that it was. And yet, if even silence has weight, if even invisibility can leave a trace, what else, hidden still, is waiting to be found? In the hush of the museum or the cool shadows of a cliffside, we sometimes find them, not as towering skeletons or sharp-jawed monsters, but as delicate traces pressed into stone. A swirl, a ridge, the faint ripple of a segmented back once alive beneath the sea. Cambrian fossils, not just the remains of something ancient, but the echoes of a time before time had rhythm. They rest in slabs of shale, still as sleep, quiet as breath. And when we peer into them, squinting through the folds of geology, are we only looking backward? Or might we also be looking inward? Because something strange happens when the eye lingers too long on stone. It begins to reflect, not like a mirror of glass, but like memory does, soft at the edges, blurred, but undeniably familiar. You begin to see shapes not just of ancient creatures, but of yourself. Not in form exactly, but in pattern, in presence, in possibility. Could it be that we are not just the descendants of these beings, but their continuation? Their unanswered questions still walking? We see trilobites pressed into slate, their compound eyes turned to dust. Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and forward snout, like a creature invented in a dream. Anomalocaris, vast and graceful, lost without a skeleton to anchor it. These were lives with logic unfamiliar to us, anatomies that defied future blueprints. And yet, deep in our cells, strands of them hum on. DNA doesn't forget. It folds, mutates, loops, remembers. Could it be that we are the long echo of an ancient mind that never quite closed its eyes? Stone doesn't speak in words. It whispers in isotopes, in pressure scars, in mineral replacements that took millions of years to shape what once was soft into what now survives. Geologists read these stories like slow-motion scripture. Oxygen ratios, uranium decay, the dance of carbon across a billion-year ledger. And yet, beneath the measurements, there is something else, something unmeasured. A kind of longing, not because the past is lost, but because we were never separate from it to begin with. What if these fossils are not just objects of study, but relics of awareness? What if they are not telling us what used to be, but what still is? Evolution does not erase, it rewrites. And what was written in the Cambrian stone still lives behind our eyes, in the way cells divide, in the way limbs bud, in the way the body learns to move. Maybe we didn't replace these creatures. Maybe we remembered them into new forms. And perhaps that's what the mirror shows us. Not a reflection of form, but of function, of effort, of being. The quiet will to exist, to sense, to move through water or time. They did it first. We still do. Not because we must, but because something deep within insists that we try. There is a humility in this thought, that we are not the pinnacle, but the continuation. Not the crown, but the thread. Evolution, after all, is not a ladder but a tide. Rising, receding, returning. Nothing is permanent, yet nothing is truly lost. Even extinction, even erasure, is just another kind of memory. Another fold in the stone. Sometimes we hold a fossil in our hand. A trilobite, curled in death, still cradled by time, and we feel a flicker. Not because it resembles us, but because it feels like remembering. A memory too old for the brain, too deep for words. Something in the marrow says, I was once this, I am still this, and maybe that's not poetry. Maybe it's biology. What if life is a loop of awareness, playing itself out in countless costumes? What if the Cambrian bloom was not a beginning, but a rehearsal? A dream we're still dreaming, only now with lungs instead of gills, with feet instead of fins, with language instead of light-sensing cells? Could it be that when we study the past, we are studying ourselves, but softer, wilder, less certain? And if we are the memory of the forgotten, then perhaps forgetting is not failure, but transition. A way the planet keeps dreaming forward. A way Earth continues its long, slow exhale through forms. The mirror in the stone does not show us what we were. It shows us what we are still becoming. And yet, if memory lingers in stone and echoes in cells, what else might be carried forward, waiting to surface again? There are shapes the universe seems to love more than others. A spiral, a branching limb, a chambered shell. These designs recur like old songs sung in new voices, like lullabies rewritten but never forgotten. They appeared once in the warm tides of the Cambrian, curled in soft bodies drifting along the sea floor, and they appear still in the turn of a fern, the coil of a galaxy, the helix of the very code that writes us. Why do these patterns refuse to fade? Maybe not because they are perfect, but because they are possible. Because they work. Because they whisper a kind of balance between form and function, beauty and survival. Evolution, for all its chaos, leans toward what lingers. Not because it is best, but because it is remembered. Again and again eyes return. Limbs reappear. Segments repeat. Symmetry rises like breath held and released, as if life itself is humming softly, trying to recall a verse it once sang clearly in the dark. The fossil record, that long, slow language of stone, shows us not just change but insistence. Trilobites once scuttled with compound eyes. Later, dragonflies would shimmer with lenses just as complex. The nautilus curled into chambers the way an ammonite did eons before. Trees branched like ancient corals. Patterns folded into themselves and unfolded again, as if the earth had favorites, and evolution had a memory of its own. Is it possible that life doesn't just experiment, but remembers? Could it be that some forms are less invention than recurrence? Less a spark of something new, and more a return to something older than thought? There is a tenderness in this, a sense that we are not just shaped by survival but by echoes, that somewhere in our deepest workings, beneath instinct, beneath adaptation, there is resonance. As if bodies are not built from scratch but tuned like instruments, and the tuning it follows old songs. Spirals form when growth is steady, when pressure balances, when energy seeks the most elegant way to move. We see them in ammonite shells but also in storms, in galaxies, in fingerprints. Is it coincidence? Or something deeper? The physics of form? Or the poetry of matter trying to remember how to become itself? And symmetry. Why do so many creatures reflect their own halves like mirrors in motion? Eyes on both sides, wings paired, legs matching. Perhaps symmetry is simply what emerges when life reaches in both directions at once, toward balance and toward movement. Or maybe it's an ancient comfort, a visual lullaby that says, yes, this has happened before. You are not the first. You are not alone. Even decay follows these echoes. The way bones fracture along stress lines, the way leaves skeletonize in frost, the way cliffs crumble into fractals. Entropy, too, has rhythm. Nothing ends all at once. It forgets in patterns. And deep beneath the surface, where tectonic plates slide past one another, subduction zones swallow the seafloor, recycling not just rock, but history. Patterns buried, patterns born again. Fossils crushed and folded, only to rise again as hills, as ridges, as silhouettes we trace and do not recognize, though something in us always has. What if there is no such thing as extinction, only transformation delayed? What if every form that ever lived leaves behind more than bones? What if it leaves pressure, memory, influence? An unseen ripple that nudges future life, gently, towards something familiar, not because it must, but because it still can. Eyes were not invented once. They emerged in many places, many times, each time differently, and yet not so different, as if light itself was calling to be seen, as if the universe wanted to be perceived. And each time life answered, it did so in a familiar shape. Limbs too, fins to feet to wings to hands. The same blueprint, reshaped over and over, like clay passed from one sculptor to the next. What begins in the water walks on land. What flies once may swim again. The form bends, but the idea refuses to fade. Could it be that some forms are not just functional, but loved? And if life reuses what it loves, then maybe evolution is not a march, but a melody, a refrain, always changing, yet always returning. Maybe that's why we find ourselves so moved by the spiral of a shell, the twin wings of a butterfly, the gaze of another eye across time. They are not just shapes. They are memories. They are echoes. And perhaps we, too, are echoes, not only of ancestors, but of ancient dreams. And yet, if echoes carry this far, what earlier voice began the song? Even explosions have roots. Life's true genesis hides in simpler things. RNA whispers, lipid bubbles, deep-sea sparks. So much of the Cambrian draws our eyes. The sudden bloom, the strange anatomies, the fossilized shadows dancing in stone. Feels like a beginning, a great unfurling. But beginnings, too, can be echoes. Even fireworks rise from quiet matches. Even the loudest chapter rests on a page turned silently before it. And so, if we listen with stillness, if we gaze gently beneath that Cambrian curtain, we find that something older was already humming in the dark. Before bones, before symmetry, before even the simple beat of a heartbeat, there were molecules. Not just chemicals, but conversations. The earliest whispers of selfhood passed between strands of RNA, curling into forms not yet called alive, but dreaming of it. Could it be that life did not begin with bodies, but with longing? A pull toward replication, a flicker of stability inside chaos, a moment where matter asked itself to stay. Deep beneath the sea, in vents black as unlit stars, where pressure was immense and sunlight never reached, the elements stirred. Iron, sulfur, heat, bubbles formed, not by accident but by necessity. Lipid walls surrounded fragile interiors. These weren't cells yet, but they might as well have been. Tiny shelters, warm cradles for chemical rituals, places where entropy hesitated and persistence began to take shape. Maybe the first self was not an organism, but a pocket of resistance. A momentary loop in time where the laws of thermodynamics bent just enough for replication to feel possible. Not because it should have happened, but because it could. And that was enough. That was everything. Time, back then, did not move in hours or eons, it moved in cycles. Reactions repeating, failing, folding, and beginning again. No eyes to see, no nerves to remember. Just patterns. Just chemistry cradling probability. And yet, these patterns endured. They became pathways. They became processes. And slowly, so slowly, they became life. The fossil record cannot hold this story. There are no bones to press into mud. No shells to capture in limestone. What we search for are isotope trails. Ratios of carbon, traces of sulfur. Ghosts of metabolism written not in bodies, but in breath. The breath of bacteria. The sigh of single-celled survivors. It's not silence we find, it's a language too soft for stone. There were mats, vast, slimy empires of microbial life, layered like blankets across ancient seafloors. Stromatolites, we call them now. Rock-like, yes, but alive once, pulsing with cyanobacteria. Builders of oxygen, makers of sky. These were not ancestors of trilobites or worms, they were architects of atmosphere. Before animals could think or move or wonder, these tiny engineers were reshaping the air itself. A slow revolution, not of conquest, but of exhalation. And even they were not first. Could it be that life began again and again? That Genesis was not a single spark, but a pattern of emergence? Maybe some early attempts failed, washed away, buried, forgotten. Or maybe life has no true beginning. Maybe it was always there, hiding in the physics of water, in the temperature of stars, in the geometry of carbon. Waiting, wanting. We imagine life beginning with drama. But what if it began with patience? In RNA strands copying themselves in clay, in molecules floating across a warm tide pool, bumping gently, making mistakes, and calling those mistakes evolution. Not because they knew where they were going, but because they didn't, because every path is a step, even if it leads in circles. And even now, even in us, those ancient whispers remain. Our cells still divide with the rhythm of those early cycles. Our energy still flows through mitochondria, once free-living bacteria, now woven into our being. The deep sea still holds vents that bubble with prebiotic chemistry. It never stopped. The origin of life was not a single point, but a tide that never truly receded. The Cambrian, with all its wonder, was a bloom, but the roots lie deeper, in molecules that memorized how to cling, in minerals that guided reactions, in heat that offered energy without light, in darkness, yes, but not in absence. Maybe the Cambrian was only the beginning we could see. And if that's true, if the visible story began mid-sentence, what else have we missed? What symphonies of simpler life still play in frequencies we don't yet know how to hear? What epics hide in enzymes? What futures rest inside bacteria too quiet for us to notice? What if we are not only descended from the Cambrian's wild designs, but also from forgotten conversations in warm mud? And if life emerged once from chaos and chance, could it be doing so still elsewhere? Not in alien planets of science fiction, but in silent corners of Earth. In ice, in caves, in acid pools. Life that speaks softly and doesn't wish to be seen. Not because it hides, but because it remembers how easy it is to be lost. And yet, if life began in silence, how many other silences might be beginnings? 2. The Cambrian never truly ended. Its textures may have softened in stone, its creatures fossilized into ancient shadow, but something within that moment, the bloom, the branching, the sudden breath of diversity, never stopped echoing. Not entirely, not really. Its memory doesn't only rest beneath rock. It moves inside us. It hums in our marrow. It walks with us when we are unaware. And maybe, just maybe, it walks with Earth too. Because memory isn't only a human invention. It's not limited to language or neurons. Sometimes memory lives in the way minerals bend under pressure. Sometimes it pulses in the rhythm of tectonic shifts, or rests quietly in layers of silt laid down like dreams over dreams. Memory can be chemical, atmospheric, geological. Entire continents move as if stirred by something remembered. A shape they used to hold, a reunion of once adjacent lands now separated by eons of salt and sea. Is it possible the Earth remembers itself? Not consciously, not with thought or plan, but with process, with persistence, with a pattern that repeats not because it must, but because it longs to. Maybe that's why spirals reappear, why limbs branch in 3s and 5s, why some creatures, though extinct, still feel familiar. Not because we saw them, but because we were them, or because we carry the genetic perfume of their ancient forms. The Cambrian wasn't a fossilized explosion. It was a chord, and Earth is still humming it. Some say evolution has moved on, but what if it hasn't? What if it loops, softly, like a forgotten song re-entering our sleep? Maybe it circles because there are only so many paths that stability can find. Or maybe Earth itself is dreaming, not metaphorically but metabolically. Subduction zones recycle the crust like thoughts being reprocessed. Volcanoes exhale what was once swallowed. Ocean currents drift like tides in a sleeping body, cycling nutrients, stirring life. Could it be that Earth is less a rock and more a sleeper? There is something deeply patient in the planet's rhythm. Something that feels rehearsed, like it's been through this before. Like it's not just reacting, but remembering. Some of the earliest Cambrian creatures, Hallucigenia, Wawaxia, the armored oddities of deep time, seem to vanish without successors. And yet, their structures, their decisions appear elsewhere. Elsewhen. Spines that once protected an ancient worm now guard a porcupine. Filter-feeding fans that once lined trilobite legs now shape the mouths of baleen whales. Not because they copied, but because Earth never really let the idea go. The fossils we find are not just remnants of life. They are suggestions, nudges from the past. Quiet prompts that say, this worked once. Maybe try again. What if extinction doesn't always erase, but composts? What if time is not a line, but a slow swirl of recurrence, where the future is built from softened fragments of the past? And if Earth dreams through life, do we dream through Earth? Our bodies carry isotopes from ancient oceans. Our bones are sedimentary. Our breath, carbon once held in the lungs of forests that have turned to coal. Even our thoughts, electrical whispers in the brain, depend on salt ions, forged in stars and filtered through long evaporated seas. We are not just from Earth. We are Earth organized briefly into awareness. And so when we imagine the Cambrian as distant, are we forgetting that its molecules never left? That the carbon in a trilobite's exoskeleton may now live in your fingernail? That the calcium in an armored worm's spike might now cradle a human tooth? Maybe memory isn't held in what we know, but in what we're made of. Even our genes, those soft blueprints folded inside every cell, carry echoes that stretch backward beyond counting. Molecular fossils tucked between the codes we read. Genes for simplicity, for structure, for things we no longer express, but never truly let go. We walk forward, but our DNA glances back. Could it be that Earth is not just remembering the Cambrian, but continuing it? The phase not ended, but softened, transformed, whispered instead of shouted. Perhaps that's why some creatures today still feel primordial. The horseshoe crab, older than mountains, still slides across muddy shores. The velvet worm, with its ancient way of walking, still weaves through leaf litter. Not survivors, not relics, but ongoing sentences in a story we mistake as closed. And what if we, too, are part of that story, not the climax, not the goal, but another branch? Another dream inside Earth's long sleep? Maybe we think we're awake only because we forgot how deep the dreaming runs. Maybe life is not moving on, but moving through. And if Earth is still dreaming, softly, slowly, with crust and cloud and cell, what dreams might come next? And yet, if this much can be remembered, what else have we misunderstood as forgotten?